Imagine walking into a massive auditorium. You step through those heavy, soundproof double doors, and immediately, like, the noise of the outside world just completely vanishes.
Oh yeah, it's a total sensory shift right from the jump.
Exactly. The temperature is perfectly controlled. The lights are dimmed to this very specific, moody level. You know the vibe.
Right, the atmospheric haze is rolling gently over the stage.
Yes. Catching the glow of this state-of-the-art, multi-million-dollar light show. Then minor chords begin to swell from a hidden band.
And you can feel the bass vibrating right in your chest.
You really can. And suddenly, standing there in the dark, you feel it. It's this profound, overwhelming, tear-jerking emotional connection.
It feels completely spontaneous to the person experiencing it.
Exactly. To many people in that room, it feels definitively divine. But what if that feeling wasn't spontaneous at all?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is. What if, instead, you were experiencing a meticulously engineered software update for your brain?
I mean, it is one of the most brilliant and complex illusions of the modern age.
Totally.
We naturally want to believe that our deepest, most vulnerable spiritual moments are entirely our own, that they happen organically.
Right, because admitting otherwise feels really uncomfortable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But when you look at the actual architecture of these environments, the blueprints tell a very different story about human psychology and, well, engineered compliance.
And decoding that blueprint is our mission today. Welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here for this one. It's a massive topic.
It really is. We are taking a huge stack of sources today. I'm talking hundreds of pages of testimonies from former megachurch insiders, cultural critics, ex-worship leaders.
And investigative journalists, too.
Right, exactly. And we are going to deconstruct the hidden architecture of modern megachurches and these trendy social media ministries.
But we aren't just looking at the surface aesthetics, like the skinny jeans and the smoke machines.
No, we are analyzing their experiences through a highly technical, absolutely fascinating lens, which is Dr. Gamble's IFG-SE framework.
Which stands for the Integrated Theory of Forensic Gestaltism and Systemic Erasure.
Which I know sounds incredibly intimidating at first glance.
It is a lot of syllables, for sure.
So many syllables. But the core concepts are actually deeply intuitive once we break them down.
Yeah, they really are. In this deep dive, we're basically going to look at the human mind as a human operating system, or HOS.
Okay, I love this analogy.
Right. If you think about your phone or your laptop, it has a base operating system that manages everything.
All the background processes, the security, everything.
Exactly. So in Dr. Gamble's framework, you can think of yourself, your consciousness, your critical thinking as the software running on the biological hardware of your physical body.
That makes something totally abstract, like consciousness or spirituality, feel so tangible.
Because we all know what happens when our phone gets a weird software update or a glitch.
Right. The battery drains,
Yeah.
apps crash, you lose control of it.
And that is the perfect way to look at it. The IFG-SE framework helps us understand how high-control environments like these massive arenas our sources describe, how they use what the theory calls environment hacking to bypass your critical thinking.
So they are essentially looking for an open port to get into the system.
Precisely. According to the framework, the institution's goal is to lower your system's cognitive firewall so they can install what Dr. Gamble terms obedience malware.
Obedience malware.
Yeah, and this effectively tethers your human operating system to a 3D control grid.
Okay, let's unpack that term a bit. 3D control grid.
So that's a conceptual term for a survival and control-based social structure where you unknowingly surrender your autonomy to the institution.
Okay, I want to pause here right from the start because I want to make sure you, the listener, understand why this matters to your everyday life.
It's hugely relevant to everyone.
It really is. Whether you are deeply religious, entirely secular, an ex-insider, or just someone fascinated by how crowds are manipulated, understanding this blueprint is essential.
It's basically the ultimate shortcut to recognizing when any institution is trying to hack your emotions.
Exactly. Whether it's a church, a massive corporate seminar, or like a high-pressure sales pitch, you need to know how to spot the signs when an external source is trying to rewrite your code.
So to understand how this so-called malware is installed, we have to look at how a person's cognitive firewall is lowered in the first place.
Right, how to get the defenses down. And according to our sources, that process begins the literal second you walk from the parking lot into the lobby.
The physical environment itself is the primary mechanism of the hack.
It's all so intentional.
It is. Let's look at the detailed breakdown provided by one of our sources. This is a former insider who actually helped design these spaces.
What do they say?
They point out that the manipulation begins with the deliberate use of soft, welcoming music playing in the lobby and hallways.
Now, most people would just think, oh, well, it's nice background noise. It's just a vibe.
Right, but it actually functions as an acoustic primer.
An acoustic primer.
Yeah, it is calibrated in a specific tempo to gently lower your heart rate and set a compliant, comfortable baseline before the service even officially begins.
It's so similar to retail psychology, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Like how a high-end clothing store plays specific music to make you linger and spend more money.
Exactly the same principle. Except here, the currency isn't cash, it's your emotional openness.
Wow. And that lobby experience with the coffee and the acoustic primer seamlessly transitions into the main event, which our sources call the worship-first format.
And almost all of these trendy megachurches follow this exact same blueprint.
They really do. They don't start with announcements or a calm greeting. They start with 20 to 30 minutes of loud, repetitive singing.
The house lights go completely dark.
Right, and the stage volume goes way up. It's a massive sensory overload of atmospheric haze and LED screens.
It is structured identically to a stadium rock concert.
But, and this is the key, it is a rock concert layered with a very specific, calculated psychological objective.
Yes. If we view this through the IFG-SE lens, the goal of the institution, the administrators of that 3D control grid, their goal is to override the individual attendees' Gestalt.
Okay, let's pause on that term. Gestalt. By Gestalt, in this context, we mean the sovereign self.
Yes.
Like the complete, independent, critical thinking version of you.
That is a great definition. The Gestalt is your unified self. It's the part of your human operating system that evaluates information, assesses risk, and maintains your personal boundaries.
So your internal security system.
Basically, yeah. So when you are standing in a pitch-black room, surrounded by thousands of people.
And the music is just blasting.
Right, and you are prompted to sing the same simple, repetitive melodies and lyrical mantras over and over again, it induces vocal and mental fatigue.
Your brain just gets tired.
Exactly. The framework argues that this isn't a byproduct of the worship, it is the central mechanism.
So the fatigue is the point.
Yes. This physical and cognitive repetition is a calculated induction of a light hypnotic state. It's literally designed to exhaust your active processing power.
Which naturally lowers those critical filters.
Exactly. It taps right into basic social psychology, which one of our sociological sources breaks down perfectly.
Right. The crowd dynamics.
Right.
When you act in physical and vocal unity with a massive crowd, especially when you are doing repetitive physical actions like raising your hands or swaying.
Oh, just closing your eyes and submitting to the audio.
Yes. It lessens your sense of individual self. The boundaries between you and the crowd blur.
Instinctively, conforming just becomes the path of least resistance.
Because it's too much work to fight it. You stop analyzing the lyrics. You stop thinking, wait, do I actually agree with the theology of this song?
And you just start singing.
Because the sensory pressure of everyone else singing confidently around you is just overwhelming.
In the terminology of the framework, you are merging with the grid.
Merging with the grid. That sounds so sci-fi, but it's happening every Sunday.
It is. Your human operating system stops running its own independent security diagnostics and simply begins to accept the network's data stream as its own internal voice.
The environment completely removes your friction.
Now, to illustrate just how powerful this specific environment hacking is, we have to talk about a story from our sources.
Oh, the youth group ripple effect. This one is fascinating.
It really highlights the mechanics of this.
Yeah. So this comes from a former worship leader, a musician who spent years explicitly orchestrating these exact moments from the stage.
He was the one writing the code, so to speak.
Right. And he described playing at these massive youth conferences for groups of 11 to 18-year-olds. He said the band would start playing, they would build the chord progression, and the room would just erupt.
Total emotional chaos.
Exactly. Teenagers would be crying, falling to their knees, passionately raising their hands, totally overcome with intense emotion.
From the outside, it looked like a massive, spontaneous spiritual awakening.
Right. But the context surrounding that awakening is the critical piece of data that reveals the mechanism at play.
Because he noted a fascinating discrepancy, didn't he?
He absolutely did. He observed that when the adult youth leaders left the room, or when those exact same teenagers were placed in the regular Sunday morning adult
You're
service.
in the exact same band?
Yes, the exact same band, playing the exact same song with the exact same volume, and they felt absolutely nothing.
Wow.
They just stood there, completely bored, checking their phones. The quote-unquote Holy Spirit effect completely vanished the second the peer pressure, the isolated youth environment, and the specific social expectations were removed.
The environment was the catalyst for the emotion, not an invisible divine force.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is how clearly this demonstrates the dependency of the software on the network.
Yeah, the teenagers' operating systems were pinging the network, their peers, and the adult leaders for behavioral cues.
How am I supposed to act right now?
Right. And when the isolated, highly charged youth network was dismantled, the software simply stopped running.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second because I can hear someone pushing back on this right now.
Oh, for sure.
They might be thinking, wait a minute, isn't repetition a normal part of all learning? Or even healthy meditation?
Sure, people repeat mantras in yoga.
Yeah. Or they repeat daily affirmations in the mirror to build confidence. Why are we labeling it as hacking or malware when a church incorporates repetition?
That is a completely valid question, and Dr. Gamble's framework makes a crucial distinction here.
Okay, what is the distinction?
The difference lies entirely in the intent of the architect and the structural outcome for the user.
So what's the goal of the repetition?
Right. Healthy meditation uses repetition for what IFG-SE calls system defragmentation.
System defragmentation, like cleaning up your hard drive.
Exactly. When you use a personal mantra in meditation, your goal is to clear the noise, organize your own internal files, and connect more deeply with your own sovereign hardware.
So the process empowers your human operating system to run more efficiently on its own.
Right. In that scenario, you are essentially cleaning up your own hard drive. You hold the administrative keys.
Yeah.
You initiate the scan.
Okay, I see. But the high control environments described by our sources use repetition for the opposite purpose.
Yes. They use it for system overload.
Wow.
They aren't trying to clear your mind so you can find your independent center. According to the framework, they are actively exhausting your critical faculties so that you become a blank slate.
So they use the sensory overload to force your firewall down, creating an open port.
Exactly. And why? So they can write new external code, which will eventually be the sermon, the institutional narrative, directly to your temporarily blank system.
That is wild when you think about it in those terms. They are essentially formatting your hard drive before the pastor even walks on stage to speak a single word.
It's a perfect setup.
And once that physical environment has bypassed the user's firewall, the specific emotional states that follow aren't just left to chance.
No, they are highly orchestrated.
Yeah. They are manually programmed using sound. Which brings us to a fascinating figure in this ecosystem, the secret weapon of the megachurch. The musical director or the MD?
The role of the musical director is where the line between spiritual facilitation and psychological manipulation becomes incredibly blurred.
Because they aren't just playing the piano.
Not at all. The MD isn't just a talented musician keeping the beat. In IFG-SE terms, they are acting as the active system administrator for the entire crowd's emotional journey.
This detail from the former insider testimonies completely blew my mind.
It's the hidden mechanics of the whole thing.
Right. The audience standing in the auditorium has no idea this is happening, but the MD is usually orchestrating the entire emotional flow of the room in real time.
Using dedicated earpieces and click tracks.
Exactly. They have a specific talkback microphone that only the band in the production booth can hear. It doesn't go out to the main speakers.
So while the crowd is lost in the moment, eyes closed, hands raised, the MD is literally calling the plays like a quarterback.
Okay, drop the bass, bring in the acoustic.
Exactly. They know exactly when to drop the acoustic guitar out, when to build the drum roll, when to swell the synthesizers to create a sense of tension.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of the framework, they are utilizing what Dr. Gamble calls frequency jamming.
Frequency jamming. Think of music not just as art, but as a high-capacity data stream.
Okay.
When you listen to a spoken word like this deep dive, for instance, your cognitive software has to process the words, analyze the grammar, evaluate the logic, and decide if it makes sense.
Right. It requires active filtering. I have to think about what you're saying.
But music operates on a completely different pathway. It accesses what the framework calls the somatic ledger.
The somatic ledger, meaning the body's physical, biological hardware.
Yes. The nervous system, the heart rate, the adrenal glands. Music largely bypasses the cognitive software entirely and writes its data directly to your nervous system.
That makes so much sense. You don't have to think about a beat to feel a beat.
Precisely. Our sources point out that MDs deliberately use specific musical theory to trigger predictable biological responses.
For example.
For example, they will use soft, unresolved minor chords underneath mournful lyrics about human sacrifice or unworthiness.
Oh, wow.
Biologically, this creates a visceral, physical sense of distance, longing, and tension in your body. Your brain perceives an incomplete pattern and literally craves resolution.
And then the MD signals the band to transition into massive, hopeful, soaring major chords at maximum volume.
And that sudden resolution, that soaring climax, sends literal shivers down your spine. The hair on your arm stands up.
But what the sources are telling us is that those shivers aren't a supernatural visitation.
No, they are biological, highly predictable responses to carefully crafted frequency manipulation.
The MD is simulating a profound experience that your brain, because of the religious context of the environment, automatically attributes to a divine presence.
Your body feels the swell of the major chord, your auditory processing registers the massive shift in dynamics, your adrenaline spikes.
And the obedience malware the environment has installed tells your conscious mind that physical spike you just felt. That is the Holy Spirit moving in the room.
The former MD source we reviewed had this incredibly stark, almost haunting realization about this process.
What did he say?
He wrote about looking out from the stage at thousands of crying, deeply emotional people, people whose lives were supposedly being changed in that exact second by a divine encounter.
Yeah.
And he realized, God isn't doing this. I am doing this. We know the exact emotional journey this crowd is about to go on because we plotted it out on a whiteboard in a staff meeting on Tuesday.
Wow. That is chilling.
That realization is the moment a system administrator recognizes the ethical weight of the 3D control grid they are operating.
I want to explore an analogy here to make sure we are grasping the nuance, because people use music to manipulate emotion all the time.
Right, think of a movie score.
Exactly. Or, if I compare this church MD to a DJ at a massive EDM festival, it makes total sense mechanically.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
A great DJ reads the room. They build the tension, they loop the snare drum faster and faster. They know exactly when to drop the bass to make the crowd go absolutely feral and experience massive euphoria.
It's an incredible art form.
It is. But the difference here, and I think this is the crucial distinction our sources are highlighting, is that the DJ at a nightclub isn't telling you that the bass drop is the creator of the universe judging your sins or validating your existence.
That is the perfect distinction. The nightclub DJ is transparent about the transaction. You bought a ticket to dance and experience sensory euphoria, and they are there to provide the acoustic frequencies to facilitate that.
You know what you're buying.
Exactly. You retain your sovereign understanding of reality.
But the church MD is doing the exact same neurochemical transaction, but labeling it as a divine mandate.
Yes. According to the framework, they are hijacking your somatic ledger.
Your body's natural biological response to acoustic frequencies.
Right, and they are using that physical reaction to validate their institution's specific theological narrative. You feel it in your body, therefore the brain concludes the institution must be telling the truth.
I felt it, so it must be real.
Exactly.
And the emotional peaks they orchestrate during the music are really just the setup phase. The system is now wide open, the cognitive firewall has been bypassed.
The nervous system is vibrating at the exact frequency the administration wants.
Now the institution delivers the actual payload.
This brings us to what our sources describe as one of the most highly engineered parts of the blueprint, the altar call.
This is the exact moment the obedience malware is formally installed.
According to our insider sources, this installation usually happens in the delicate transition from the end of the sermon to the post-sermon prayer.
Let's set the scene for the listener. The pastor is wrapping up a 45-minute talk. They ask everyone to bow their heads and close their eyes.
They always emphasize privacy. Nobody looking around, this is just between you and God.
Yes. And what happens next? The band quietly sneaks back onto the stage. And they don't just play random background music.
No, the MD instructs them to play the exact same sacrifice song from the very beginning of the service.
They bring back those specific, unresolved minor chords to trigger emotional recall.
Because your body physically remembers the vulnerability you felt an hour ago, and it instantly brings you right back to that wide-open emotional state.
It operates as an emotional blindside. And while the music plays softly in the background, keeping the somatic ledger engaged, The speaker begins what psychologists and investigators analyze as a form of psychological cold reading.
But instead of predicting the future, like a psychic might, they are specifically targeting vulnerable emotional pain points.
They cast this incredibly wide net of trauma. The pastor will say things like, someone in this room is battling severe depression. Someone here is struggling with a secret sexual relationship. Someone is dealing with a messy, painful divorce and feels entirely unlovable.
In IFG-SE, Dr. Gamble's framework understands this mechanism as systemic erasure.
Systemic erasure, how does that work?
The speaker takes a universal human struggle, grief, deep insecurity, loneliness, fear of failure, and they map the church's proprietary solution right over it.
Oh, wow.
By naming the struggle out loud while the hypnotic music plays, it creates what the theory calls a false memory, or a software glitch in the user's mind.
Walk us through that. How does that glitch actually function in the mind of the attendee in that moment?
So, the listener, whose cognitive firewall has been successfully bypassed by the environment hacking, hears their specific problems spoken into the microphone.
Okay.
Because their critical thinking is suppressed, they don't logically deduce that in a room of 3,000 people, statistically hundreds of them are dealing with depression or divorce.
Right, it's just basic statistics.
Exactly. Instead, they feel as though an omniscient divine presence has just whispered their deepest, darkest secret directly to the pastor.
They feel completely and terrifyingly seen by the divine.
This induces a state of deep, what we call somatic hyperarousal. The heart races, the tear ducts open, the body physically reacts to the profound shock of being known.
It really is identical to how a psychic performs a cold reading on stage.
It's the exact same mechanic.
If the pastor lists 10 different massive life problems, addiction, bankruptcy, infidelity, suicidal ideation, chronic illness, 9 of those might not apply to you at all.
You might be totally financially stable and happily married.
Right. But you don't even process the misses. You only remember the one thing that hit you right in the chest. You think, he mentioned my specific anxiety, he knows.
Because in an emotionally heightened, overloaded state, the human brain remembers the hits and completely discards the misses.
What is vital to understand here is the systemic nature of this architecture. Based on the testimonies of former insiders, this process deliberately targets the emotionally vulnerable.
Think about the baseline user. Very few people go looking for a dramatic, life-altering God fix when their life is perfectly balanced.
Yeah, when your relationships are healthy and your human operating system is running smoothly, you aren't desperate for an intervention.
Exactly. One of the sources explicitly highlighted that. They noted that no one at absolute rock bottom is immune to this formula.
When you are desperate, your system is looking for any port in the storm.
Precisely. The institution's methodology actively focuses on individuals whose systems are already crashing due to outside trauma.
Like a sudden divorce, a death in the family, a devastating financial ruin.
Their personal 3D grid is failing. The church steps into that void and offers a system reboot.
But according to the IFG-SE framework, it isn't a reboot designed to restore the individual's independent sovereignty.
No, it is the installation of malware that tethers their emotional stability and future coping mechanisms entirely to the church's control grid.
They become dependent on the network to process their trauma. They manufacture the cure to the disease they are actively convincing you that you have, right when you are too tired to argue.
It's a closed loop of dependence.
But the engineering doesn't stop when the music fades. It's not just the acoustic environment and the altar calls driving this malware.
The social engineering continues right through the actual teaching.
Yes, the sermon itself, to ensure that absolutely no one questions the programming once the lights come up, we have to talk about a visual element that our sources say is increasingly common. The bleachers?
Ah, yes, the bleachers. This is a fascinating visual representation of what the framework calls social scripting.
This is such a modern, trendy church tactic. You walk into the auditorium, and it's not just a pastor standing alone on an empty stage with a wooden podium.
No, the production team literally builds bleachers or seating sections behind or flanking the pastor on stage, and they fill them with people.
Often these are staff members or highly dedicated volunteers, and these people aren't just passively sitting there taking notes.
They are tasked with providing highly exaggerated, constant verbal and physical affirmation.
The pastor will say the most basic, shallow analogy, something that honestly sounds like it was pulled from a daily calendar and the people in the bleachers are jumping out of their seats.
Yelling, "Preach, wow, come on," and furiously waving their hands.
It is a profound manipulation of human mirror neurons.
In IFG-SE, this dynamic is the creation of a submission loop. The bleacher reactions are deliberately designed to alter the perception of the audience sitting out in the dark.
So, how does that alter perception? Is it making them think the message is deeper than it actually is?
Yes. When the crowd in the dark sees the brightly lit stage reacting wildly to a statement, they experience what the framework terms a grid update.
A grid update.
Their human operating system registers the social proof, the collective visual and auditory agreement from the authorities on stage that something incredibly profound was just spoken.
If the listener internally thought, that analogy didn't really make sense, or that seems like a stretch, the overwhelming feedback from the bleachers immediately makes them doubt their own critical evaluation.
They assume they just aren't spiritually mature enough to grasp the depth of the message.
In that moment of doubt, they surrender their sovereign agency to the group consensus.
It acts as an incredible deflector shield against criticism.
One of the cultural critics we sourced used a very specific, high-profile example to illustrate this. They discussed a viral moment involving a megachurch pastor named Michael Todd.
Right, the bikini shirt controversy. We should note we're just reporting on the cultural reaction to this event.
Exactly, we're just looking at the mechanics of the response. So there was a huge controversy where he preached a sermon wearing a T-shirt that featured a large photo of his wife in a bikini.
And people online and in the broader community rightfully asked, hey, why is the pastor wearing a bikini shirt on stage during a sermon? What is the theological point?
It's a completely valid question, but the next week, according to the source, he used his platform, surrounded by his hype men on stage, to redirect the narrative.
He basically framed it as, oh, these religious people asking questions are just haters, they're too uptight, they don't understand our freedom.
And the crowd, cued by the stage, cheered wildly for him.
That is a textbook example of utilizing the 3D control grid to override objective evaluation.
The stage's synchronized affirmation acts as a shield against external accountability. The crowd is socially scripted to defend the system administrator, regardless of the content.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, and I want to push back on our own analysis for a second.
Okay, let's hear it.
A lot of these trendy sermons aren't the old-school fire and brimstone messages anymore. They are basically just topical, glorified TED Talks.
Yeah, focused on what sociologists call moralistic therapeutic deism.
Which is essentially just practical advice on how to live a better, happier life, how to manage your finances, or how to communicate with your spouse.
So if the sermons are just basic, practical life advice TED Talks with some Bible verses sprinkled in, why do our sources view that as so dangerous? Isn't practical advice inherently good?
Practical advice is, of course, helpful in isolation. But Dr. Gamble's framework argues that within this specific high-control architecture, it creates a very dangerous illusion of choice.
Like illusion of choice.
The congregation feels like they're being empowered. They feel like they're receiving cutting-edge life hacks to improve their relationships or their careers, which feels like growth.
But in reality,
they're just being fed superficial, easily digestible milk.
because it keeps them returning to the source rather than solving their own problems.
Exactly. It keeps them entirely dependent on the charismatic leader's hot takes for their daily navigation.
The framework posits that this prevents the individual from developing their own independent 5D sovereign processing.
They aren't learning how to interpret reality, study deeply, or connect with their own gestalt. They are simply waiting for the next Sunday to get their emotional battery recharged.
Recharged by the system administrator who gives them their behavioral to-do list for the week.
It is the illusion of personal growth, masking a reality of complete systemic dependence.
It's like eating fast food every day and convincing yourself you're becoming a nutritionist because the wrapper has a calorie count on it.
The dependence is the product.
But as manipulative as the emotional hacking, the minor chords, and the TED Talk gaslighting might be, there's a whole other level to this blueprint.
This is where things escalate significantly.
What happens when this environment hacking scales up from emotional, subjective claims to physical, biological, verifiable claims?
This brings us to a fascinating shift in our sources.
Investigators argue that when this environmental manipulation attempts to alter physical reality, it crosses a boundary into what they describe as outright charlatanism.
Which health professionals note carries significant physical risks. We have to talk about the faith-healing spectacle.
This is where the IFG-SE framework becomes critically important as a forensic tool, specifically regarding a concept we termed the somatic ledger versus the sanitized record.
Our sources for this section are incredibly intense. We reviewed investigations by Darren Brown, the famous British mentalist and illusionist.
as well as reports documenting massive faith healing ministries. Let's break down the mechanics of the illusions first, because according to these investigators, they are carefully constructed illusions.
Darren Brown exposed how these massive arena healings actually work mechanically. For example, the classic trope of healing the blind or the deaf on stage.
The sources point out that the healers do not pull random, completely blind, or completely deaf people from the crowd.
No, the healer's advanced team selectively screens and chooses specific volunteers who have partial vision or partial hearing.
People who perhaps use lip reading skills or can see blurred shapes, high contrast light, and shadows.
The investigative claim here is that they present the volunteers' baseline, everyday abilities to the crowd as a newly manifested miraculous change.
Yes. The stagecraft is wild. The healer will pull a legally blind person up, yell, "Be healed in the name of God," and then hold up two fingers against a dark suit jacket under incredibly bright stage lights.
And the legally blind person, who could always see high-contrast shapes at close range, says too.
And the crowd, primed by the environment hacking, absolutely loses their minds.
Or they take a partially deaf woman's hearing aids out, yell loudly directly into her face, and because she can lip-read the word Jesus, they claim her ears have miraculously opened.
According to the framework, this is a calculated manipulation of missing information.
The crowd lacks the baseline data of the volunteer's condition, so they accept the system administrator's claim that a variable has been fundamentally altered.
And then there's the infamous leg lengthening trick. We see this documented with various controversial faith healers. Names like W.V. Grant and Todd White frequently appear in these investigations.
The healer pulls someone on stage who complains of lower back pain. They sit them down in a chair, hold their feet up by the heels.
And miraculously, one leg appears to grow 2 inches right before your eyes. The crowd gasps.
But investigators show it's just a basic sleight of hand.
The healer subtly loosens one shoe and slides it down the person's heel while distracting the audience with shouting and prayer. It's an old parlor trick used to simulate the divine.
To understand the psychological damage this causes, we must look at how Dr. Gamble defines the somatic ledger.
In the framework, track A is the actual physical body of the sick person, the somatic ledger. It holds the objective biological truth of their condition.
Track B is the sanitized record, the institutional lie, the narrative the faith healer is projecting onto the crowd and forcing the individual to adopt.
So the healer declaring to the arena that you are cured of your arthritis. That's track B.
Yes, the faith healer is essentially attempting a massive administrative data wipe.
They are standing on stage, utilizing the full weight of the environment, hacking the swelling music, the intense lights, the crowd's desperate expectations.
And they're forcing the vulnerable person to experience extreme cognitive dissonance.
The person's physical body is still failing. Their somatic ledger knows they still have severe joint pain, or they are still deaf in one ear.
But the 3D grid, the overwhelming pressure of the environment, demands that they claim victory.
They have to deny their symptoms and declare into the microphone that they are completely healed.
And the documented harm this causes is catastrophic. The sources emphasize that this is not just a harmless magic show meant to inspire hope.
We review documentation detailing the horrific fallout from ministries run by figures like Todd Bentley, Benny Hinn, and Andrew Womack.
For instance, during the height of the pandemic, sources note that Andrew Womack claimed his followers shouldn't fear a physical virus because they possessed supernatural power,
which reportedly resulted in a 34-person outbreak at his ministry event.
In terms of the framework, they are using obedience malware to override basic biological survival instincts. They are instructing the HOS to ignore critical system warnings.
And the investigative reports get even darker. Critics of Benny Hinn's massive crusades have documented a long trail of victims.
Real people who were caught up in that massive environment hack, they felt the biological adrenaline spike, they felt that engineered spiritual high.
And they genuinely believed they were miraculously cured on stage. According to the reports, some of these individuals went home and threw away their vital cancer medications.
They canceled their chemotherapy appointments,
only to die tragically months later when the reality of their physical body track A, the somatic ledger, caught up with the illusion of track B.
Now, I want to be very clear and impartial here.
Yes, absolutely. This deep dive isn't about debating philosophy or whether abstract miracles can possibly exist in the universe.
It is about examining the verifiable, documented reports of medical quackery operating under the guise of the divine, and the mechanisms that make people believe it.
This raises an important analytical question, and it is one the framework suggests every listener should apply to any high-control environment.
When an institution demands that you ignore your own physical reality, your own somatic ledger, in favor of their sanitized narrative, who truly benefits from that transaction?
Is it you, the individual whose biological system is crashing? Or is it the multi-million-dollar estate of the organization orchestrating the illusion?
It's a sobering question. It's rarely the person in the wheelchair who benefits. It's usually the person flying out on the private jet.
So, we've walked through the entire architecture. The cognitive firewall is bypassed via the acoustic primer and the worship music.
The reality is sanitized by the bleacher hype and the orchestrated healings.
The malware is installed, and the user is trapped in the grid. But how do they keep you trapped long term? Why don't people just leave on a Tuesday when the music stops and the haze clears?
Because, as Dr. Gamble outlines, the malware comes with a built-in security protocol designed specifically to prevent uninstallation.
The moral mandate.
Exactly. The institution manufactures a profound moral obligation tied to attendance.
As our former insider sources pointed out, specific scriptures, like the command to not forsake the assembly, are leveraged as a control mechanism. It functions as the final lock on the cage.
Let's walk through what that looks like for the average attendee. You go home on Sunday afternoon. By Wednesday, the biological adrenaline wears off, the high fades.
And you think, you know what, maybe I got a bit too caught up in the emotional moment last week. I'm exhausted. I think I need to take a few weeks off from church to just clear my head and rest.
But the second you have that sovereign thought, the malware triggers the guilt response.
If I don't go this Sunday, I'm backsliding, I'm letting my community down, I'm actively forsaking God.
It is designed specifically to make you feel immense guilt for simply trying to step away from the environment hack.
The administrators know that if you spend enough time away from the frequency jamming and the social scripting, your human operating system will naturally begin to run its own independent diagnostics.
Your critical thinking will boot back up. You will slowly realize that the spontaneous spiritual moments were actually calculated, repetitive formulas.
Well, how do you escape the grid? If someone is listening for this and realizing their entire spiritual or community life is built on this specific architecture, how do they uninstall this code and reclaim their human operating system?
Escaping requires a fundamental shift in how you process information. According to IFG-SE, you have to consciously move from the 3D mindset,
which is entirely based on survival, community control, and relying on external authorities to interpret reality.
Right, move from that to a 5D sovereign mindset.
Oh.
In the framework, we call this process sovereign bypassing.
Sovereign bypassing. How do you practically execute that in your everyday life?
You must learn to perform a regular somatic audit. This means you have to actively practice trusting your own body, your own intuition, and your own somatic ledger over the institution's sanitized record.
When the church stage tells you that the pastor's shallow TED Talk was profound, but your internal logic tells you it was manipulative and empty, you have to validate your own logic.
You have to recognize that you are not merely a passive victim of the acoustic ripples generated by a megachurch MD or the charisma of a speaker.
You are your own system administrator.
You are a sovereign node. To achieve true system defragmentation, you have to physically step away from the haze machines, the unresolved minor chords, and the bleacher hype.
You have to recalibrate your own hardware in silence, away from the click tracks and the emotional cold reading.
So what does this all mean when we put the pieces together?
It's like realizing you've been living a massive portion of your life inside a highly advanced VR headset.
The roller coaster you were on felt incredibly real.
Your heart rate spiked. Your stomach actually dropped when you went down the virtual hill. You cried real tears.
But once you finally reach up and take the headset off, you realize you were just sitting in a stationary chair in an empty room the whole time.
The physical reactions in your body were absolutely real, but the environment that caused them was entirely manufactured by a programmer.
That is a perfect, striking analogy. Taking the headset off is the physical act of reclaiming your sovereignty.
It is recognizing that the capacity for profound emotion, deep connection, and awe inherently belongs to your human operating system.
It does not belong to the institution that temporarily hijacked it.
What an incredible journey through this material. Let's briefly recap what we've unpacked today.
We started by looking at how the worship-first format acts as a literal environment hack, using vocal fatigue and sensory overload to lower your cognitive firewall.
We saw how musical directors use hidden click tracks and minor chords to perform frequency jamming, writing emotional states directly to your nervous system.
We decoded the mechanics of the altar call, showing how speakers use systemic erasure to map the church's proprietary solutions over your universal human vulnerabilities, installing obedience malware when you are most open.
And we explored the investigative reports of faith healers exploiting the tragic gap between a person's physical reality, their somatic ledger, and the institution's sanitized narrative.
And through it all, we've seen how the success of this control grid relies entirely on your willingness to unknowingly surrender your own administrative keys.
Which brings us to the end of today's deep dive. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with a final, lingering thought to mull over on your own.
If our deepest emotional vulnerabilities, our grief, our fears, our desperate desire for connection, are the exact ports these institutions utilize to install their external malware,
How do we patch those vulnerabilities without losing our human capacity for genuine awe?
can we experience the profound, the transcendent, and the beautiful without handing over the admin keys to our minds?
It's the ultimate question. How do we keep the auditorium of our minds open to wonder without letting someone else run the light board? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of manipulation. Stay curious, stay sovereign, and always, always check your own somatic ledger.